Every month, a stranger transferred $5,555 to me. This went on for 7 years, and I never knew who he was. But one day, the bank called. "Ma'am, $25 million has been deposited into your account." The sender left a message. Good day, dear listeners. It's Maria again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also, let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was 31 years old when my husband Daniel died, and for a long time after that, I measured my life not in years, but in grocery receipts and missed mortgage payments. We had lived in Portland, Oregon, Daniel, me, and our 7-year-old daughter, Emma. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was ours. Daniel worked as a civil engineer for a mid-sized construction firm. I taught 4th grade at Buckman Elementary. We drove a used Subaru, took beach vacations in Cannon Beach, argued over whose turn it was to unclog the shower drain. Normal. Beautifully. Completely normal. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, Daniel's car was struck by a logging truck on Highway 26. He died before the ambulance arrived. Emma and I learned this from a state trooper who knocked on our front door at 6:47 in the morning, hat in his hands, voice so quiet I had to ask him to repeat himself twice. In the weeks that followed, I discovered that grief is not the soft, tearful thing they show in movies. Grief is bureaucratic. Grief is death certificates and life insurance denials and a mortgage company that doesn't care that your husband is gone. It is Daniel's brother Marcus showing up 4 days after the funeral with a manila folder full of papers, asking about the contents of Daniel's savings account with the practiced calm of someone who had prepared for this moment for a long time. Marcus Mitchell was 3 years older than Daniel, and he had never liked me. Not since the day Daniel brought me home for Thanksgiving, and I made the mistake of disagreeing with Marcus about something trivial. I can't even remember what. And he smiled at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said, "Sarah, you're very opinionated for someone who just got here." His wife Diana was cut from the same cloth, smooth, careful, always watching. After the funeral, they wanted a share of everything. Daniel's savings, his tools, the equity in our house. They cited some old verbal agreement Daniel had apparently made with their father years before, one that existed nowhere in writing. My attorney, a tired but honest man named Gerald Oakes, told me they had no legal standing, but that didn't stop them from calling, from appearing, from making Emma uncomfortable in her own home by staring at her with calculating eyes whenever they visited. I survived that first year on Daniel's modest life insurance payout, my teacher's salary, and the help of my own mother, who drove up from Sacramento and stayed for 3 months. By the second year, I had found a rhythm, a quiet, exhausting rhythm. Emma and I ate dinner together every night. I read to her before bed even when she was old enough to read alone, because she asked me to, and because the sound of her voice asking was enough to keep me from falling apart. I was not happy, but I was upright. And then, on the 15th of November, 13 months after Daniel's death, I checked my bank account online and saw a transfer I didn't recognize. $5,555. The sender was listed only as an account number. No name, no memo. I stared at it for a long time. I assumed it was a bank error. I called my branch and sat on hold for 40 minutes. The representative told me the transfer had been initiated correctly from a private account and appeared to be a legitimate deposit. She could not share the sender's identity. I waited a week. I thought someone would call, asking for the money back. No one called. The following month, on the 15th, the same amount appeared again. $5,555.00. Same account number, no memo. I told no one. Not my mother, not my colleagues, not even Gerald. I opened a separate savings account and moved every dollar of those transfers into it, untouched, because something in me, some deeply American, deeply practical instinct, said, do not spend what you do not understand. For 7 years, that money arrived on the 15th of every month. Exactly $5,555, 7 years, 84 transfers, $466,620 in a savings account I never touched, growing quietly in the background of a life I was rebuilding with my own 2 hands. I told myself I had made peace with the mystery. I told myself it didn't matter where it came from. I told myself I was fine. I was not fine. I thought about that account number every single day, and I was right to. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in March, 7 years and 4 months after Daniel's death. Emma was 14 by then, impossibly tall with her father's gray eyes and my stubbornness. She had left for school 20 minutes earlier. I was standing at the kitchen counter in our house. We had stayed in the same house on Siskiyou Street. I had fought for it, holding a mug of coffee and listening to the rain against the windows, the way I always did when I needed a moment of quiet before the day began. My phone rang. Portland number, but not one I recognized. Ms. Mitchell, this is Carolyn Reyes calling from Pacific First Bank Account Services. Do you have a moment? I set down my mug. Yes. Ma'am, I'm calling because a significant transfer was credited to your personal checking account this morning. In accordance with our policy for transactions above a certain threshold, we're required to verify with the account holder directly. A pause. The amount is $25 million. I said nothing. I heard the rain. I heard my own breathing. Ms. Mitchell? I'm sorry, I said. Can you repeat that? She did. $25 million, credited at 6/3 that morning from a private trust account. And then she said, the sender's account included a notation, ma'am, a message. Would you like me to read it? Yes, I whispered. She read, I owed Daniel his life back. I couldn't do that, so I owe this to you and Emma instead. I hope it's enough. Take care of her. R.C. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically, my legs just stopped working and the floor was there. I sat on the tile in my bathrobe with the phone against my ear, and I read those words over and over in my mind the way you read something in a foreign language, searching for meaning just outside your reach. R.C. I didn't know any R.C. I couldn't place the initials. For 7 years, I had constructed theories, an old relative I'd never met, a charitable foundation, a clerical error that somehow repeated itself 84 times. I had never landed on anything solid. And now, RCA message, $25 million. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen and did what any 4th grade teacher does when confronted with something overwhelming. I made a list. 7 years, 84 months, $5,555 per month. I had saved every penny, never spent $1 of it. $466,620, plus the $25 million deposited that morning, a total of $25,466,620 sitting in accounts under my name. I wrote the number down and stared at it. I had earned maybe $340,000 in salary over those same 7 years. This was 75 times that. This was a number that changed things. That changed everything. And that was exactly what frightened me. Because I knew, with the cold clarity of a woman who had watched Marcus Mitchell arrive at her door 4 days after her husband's funeral with a folder full of papers, That money of this magnitude would not stay invisible. Not for long. Someone would find out. Someone always found out. Marcus had financial contacts. His wife Diana worked as an office manager for a real estate attorney in Lake Oswego. They moved in circles where information traveled. I had exactly 1 business day, maybe 2, before word could reach them somehow. Bank employees talked. Gossip moved through professional networks like water through cracks. Was I being paranoid? Perhaps. But paranoia had kept me solvent and standing for 7 years. I wasn't about to abandon it now. I picked up the phone and called Gerald Oakes. He was 63 by then, semi-retired, but he picked up on the second ring because I had been a steady client, and he was that kind of man. "Gerald," I said, "I need to see you today. It's urgent, and I need you to tell no one I called." A pause. How urgent? $25 million urgent. Another pause. Longer. I'll clear my afternoon. I showered, dressed, drove to his office in the Pearl District. The rain had stopped by then. Portland smelled like wet concrete and cedar. I parked on the street and sat in my car for a moment, watching the pedestrians pass on the sidewalk. Ordinary people with ordinary mornings. And I thought, yesterday I was one of you. In Gerald's office, I laid out everything. Every transfer, every date, every dollar, the message, the initials RC. I spread my printed bank statements across his desk like evidence at a trial, because that was exactly what they might become. Gerald listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he said, "Sarah, the first thing we need to do is verify the legality of this transfer. The second thing we need to do is find out who RC is, before anyone else does." "And if Marcus finds out first?" I asked. Gerald looked at me over his glasses. "Then we'd better move fast." That was my plan. Find RC, secure the funds legally, document everything, and do it quietly, quickly, before the wolves caught the scent. It sounded simple. It never is. Gerald moved with the efficiency of a man who understood that in financial matters, 48 hours was a lifetime. By Thursday afternoon, he had filed a formal request with Pacific First Bank under my authority as account holder to trace the originating trust account. He also retained, on my behalf, a licensed private investigator named Paul Drennan, a former financial crimes detective who now worked civil cases. Paul was methodical, soft-spoken, and expensive. Gerald assured me he was worth every dollar. I went back to work that Thursday. Buckman Elementary, 22 9-year-olds who needed to understand long division and who had no idea their teacher had $25 million sitting in a bank account and was trying very hard not to think about it during morning circle. I taught. I smiled. I collected homework. I ate my sandwich alone in my classroom at lunch and stared at the wall. It was during that lunch hour that my cell phone buzzed with a text from a number I recognized immediately and wished I didn't. Marcus. "Sarah, Diana and I would like to come by this weekend. We haven't seen Emma in a while. Let us know what works." I read it 3 times. Marcus and Diana had not asked to see Emma in 4 months. Their interest in their niece had always been intermittent at best, and it had a particular pattern I had learned to recognize over the years. It surged whenever they believed something valuable might be within reach. How had they found out? I didn't know. But the timing was not coincidental. It never was with Marcus. I did not respond to the text. Instead, I forwarded it to Gerald with a single line. "They already know something." His response came within minutes. "Noted. Say nothing. Do nothing. Let Paul work." Paul worked fast. By Friday morning, he called me to Gerald's office. The trust account that had sent the $25 million, and which Paul had traced, with Gerald's legal assistance, as the source of all 84 monthly transfers, belonged to a man named Robert Carver, 67 years old, retired, formerly the co-founder and chief operating officer of Cascade Bridge Partners, a civil engineering firm based in Bend, Oregon, Daniel's former employer. I sat very still when Paul said the name. Gerald poured me a glass of water I didn't drink. Robert Carver, Paul explained, had been in the passenger seat of Daniel's car on the morning of October 14th, 7 years ago. They had been driving to a site survey together early before dawn. The logging truck had crossed the center line. In the seconds before impact, Daniel had grabbed Robert by the shoulder and shoved him sideways toward the driver's door, away from the point of collision. The physics of it had thrown Robert partially clear of the worst of the crash. He had suffered a broken collarbone, 3 cracked ribs, and a shattered left wrist. Daniel had absorbed the full force of the impact. The accident report confirmed this. Paul had pulled it. Robert Carver had survived because Daniel Mitchell had, in a fraction of a second and without any apparent calculation, put himself between his friend and death. I sat in Gerald's office on the 14th floor of a building in the Pearl District, looking out at the gray Portland sky, and I thought about my husband, the man who argued with me about whose turn it was to do the dishes, who burned every batch of pancakes he ever made, who read Emma picture books in character voices until she fell asleep laughing. And I understood, for the first time in 7 years, what had been happening on the 15th of every month. Robert Carver had carried Daniel's death on his conscience for 7 years. He had found a way to give it weight and shape and meaning the only way he knew how. "Is he alive?" I asked. Paul hesitated. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 14 months ago. His doctors give him 8 to 12 weeks. That was why the $25 million had arrived now. Robert Carver was settling his accounts. I pressed my hands flat on the desk and took a breath. What's his legal standing? Can Marcus claim any of this? Gerald answered, Marcus has no standing whatsoever. This is a private gift, freely given to a named account holder. There is no estate involved, no probate, no inheritance law that applies. The money is legally yours, Sarah. Marcus will still try, I said. He will, Gerald agreed, which is why we need to act before he does. I want to file a preemptive legal declaration of ownership today, establishing the gift's provenance and your sole right to the funds. Do it, I said. And then, because I needed to do the human thing before the legal thing consumed everything, can Paul find me Robert Carver's address? I need to write him a letter. Paul looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at me. You understand that contact with him could complicate. He's dying, I said quietly. He gave me my daughter's future. He deserves a letter. Gerald nodded slowly. We'll find it. I drove home that evening through streets slick with rain, and I thought about the fact that the truth, when it finally arrived after 7 years of silence, had turned out to be something I could not have imagined. Not grief-shaped or cruel, but quietly, heartbreakingly kind. And somewhere in Lake Oswego, I was certain Marcus Mitchell was making phone calls. The legal declaration was filed Friday afternoon. Gerald was precise and thorough. He documented every transfer with corresponding bank statements, included the originating trust account information Paul had sourced, attached a certified copy of Robert Carver's written notation accompanying the $25 million wire, and filed the full package with the Multnomah County Circuit Court as a declaratory judgment action establishing my uncontested ownership of the funds. It wasn't strictly required by law. Gerald did it anyway because he knew Marcus, and knowing Marcus, a wall of preemptive documentation was worth 10 future court battles. I wrote Robert's letter by hand, 3 drafts, 2 torn up. The final version was short. Dear Mr. Carver, I received your message. I understand now what you've carried for 7 years, and I want you to know that you carried it alone when you didn't have to. Daniel would not have wanted that. Emma is 14. She has her father's gray eyes and his stubbornness and his laugh. She is going to be extraordinary. The future you gave her will not be wasted. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for not forgetting him. With deep gratitude, Sarah Mitchell Paul delivered it by hand to Robert's address in Bend, a modest ranch house, he told me, with a well-kept garden. Someone took the letter at the door. I didn't sleep well that weekend. I kept running numbers, scenarios, possible chess moves Marcus might make. I knew his style. He would come at it from an angle, not head-on. He would find some legal theory, however thin, and use it as a battering ram. He would be calm on the surface and furious underneath. He appeared on my doorstep at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, Diana at his side, both of them in weekend clothes that were slightly too pressed for a casual visit. Emma was at a friend's house. I had, perhaps unconsciously, made sure of that. I opened the door and did not invite them in. Marcus, Diana, Sarah. Marcus smiled, the same smile from Thanksgiving dinner years ago. We've been worried about you. Can we come in? No, I said. What do you want? His smile stayed perfectly in place. We know about the transfer, Sarah. We have contacts at Pacific First. Don't look surprised. The financial world is smaller than you think. $25 million is a lot of money to appear in a teacher's account without explanation. He paused. We believe it's connected to Daniel's death, to his employment at Cascade Bridge, which means it may constitute a wrongful death settlement, which would make it subject to estate proceedings, Diana finished smoothly, and as Daniel's next of kin, Gerald Oakes filed a declaratory judgment action yesterday afternoon, I said. The court has been provided with complete documentation establishing the legal nature and provenance of the transfer. It is a private charitable gift. It has nothing to do with wrongful death, Daniel's estate, or any claim you could legally pursue. I looked at them both steadily. You have no standing, Marcus. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not yet. Recalibration. We'd like to discuss this reasonably, he said, like family. We are not family, I said. You came to my house 4 days after your brother's funeral to ask about his savings account. That was the moment we stopped being family. Diana opened her mouth. I kept going. If you file any legal action, Gerald will bury you in countersuits. If you contact my bank again or attempt to interfere with my accounts, I will pursue it as financial harassment. If you come to my house again uninvited, I will call the police. I kept my voice perfectly level. I hope I've been clear. Marcus's smile finally fell. What was underneath it was cold and hard, and exactly what I had always suspected lived there. You're making a mistake, he said. Goodbye, Marcus. I closed the door. I stood behind it and listened to their footsteps on the porch. The silence, the click of car doors, the engine, the retreat. Then I walked to the kitchen, sat down at the table and put my face in my hands. Not because I was scared. I was. But more than fear, I felt something clean and solid settle into my chest. The particular satisfaction of having done something frightening and necessary and finding out you were capable of it. I called my mother that afternoon. I told her everything. She cried. I didn't. I took the following 4 days off work. Personal days I had accumulated over 7 years of never taking time for myself. Emma and I drove to the coast. We stayed in a small rental in Manzanita, 2 blocks from the beach. We walked in the cold wind and ate clam chowder and watched the waves come in, and I told Emma, for the first time, about Robert Carver, about her father's last moment, about what he had done. She sat very still across the table from me in a small seafood restaurant smelling of salt and butter. Then she said, "Dad pushed him?" "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a long time. "That sounds like him," she said finally. "It did. God, it did." I slept 9 hours every night in Manzanita. The ocean was loud and the silence inside it was enormous. I let myself be small for 4 days, let the Pacific remind me that my problems, however real, were bounded. Then I drove us home to Portland, and I was ready. I came back from Manzanita on a Thursday. By Friday, I had received a certified letter at my home address from a law firm in Lake Oswego, Morrison, Hale & Webb, LLC. It was not a lawsuit. It was, in the careful language of people who haven't yet decided whether to sue you, a letter of inquiry suggesting that in the interest of preserving family harmony and honoring Daniel's memory, the parties might consider a mediated conversation regarding the recent financial developments. It was Marcus, in a suit. The approach had changed. The aggression had gone underground. I gave the letter to Gerald. He forwarded a response the same afternoon. His client had no interest in mediation on a matter already subject to a filed declaratory judgment. The letter was noted and would be retained as part of the record. If Morrison, Hale, and Webb wished to proceed with any formal legal action, they should be prepared to address the court filing already in place. I didn't hear back from the law firm, but I heard from Marcus himself 3 days later, not at my door this time, on my cell phone, a number I hadn't blocked because I hadn't wanted to appear defensive. He was different on the phone. The cold calculation was wrapped in something softer, and that softness was, if anything, more dangerous than the cold. "Sarah," he said, and his voice had the texture of someone attempting warmth, "I owe you an apology. Diana and I came at you all wrong last Saturday. We were shocked, and we reacted poorly. I want you to know that's not what we intended." I sat in my car in the school parking lot, engine off, watching the building. I said nothing. "Emma is our niece," he continued. "Whatever happened between us and you, she is Daniel's daughter, and she matters to us. We're not trying to take anything from you. We felt left out of something that involved Daniel, and that hurt." A pause. "I think we all want what's best for Emma, don't we? Emma." There it was, the lever. The softest point, the one place he knew I could be moved. Was I moved? Yes. That is the honest answer. Hearing Daniel's name and his brother's voice produced a physical sensation in my chest, like a door opening onto cold air. I felt the pull of it, the old fantasy of the family we never quite had, Daniel's family, the one that had never fully accepted me, but that was still, technically, Emma's people. But I had sat on a beach in Manzanita and watched the ocean come in for 4 days. I had sat with my daughter and watched her process the truth about her father's death with the quiet dignity of someone who had grown up steady. I had thought clearly, and clearly was how I answered Marcus now. "I appreciate the call," I said, "but I don't think there's anything to discuss. The legal situation is documented. Emma has everything she needs. I hope you and Diana are well." I ended the call. I sat in the parking lot for another 10 minutes, breathing. Then I went back into the school and taught the afternoon session on Oregon State history, and I was good at it, because I always was, and because being good at something ordinary was its own kind of armor. That evening, I called Renata Ose. Renata had been my closest friend since our first year of teaching together at Buckman. 12 years of shared lunches and crisis phone calls, and the specific intimacy that comes from two women spending decades in adjacent classrooms. She was formidable in the way that quietly funny people often are. You underestimated her until the moment you realized she had understood the situation 5 moves ahead of you. I told her everything over the phone, all of it. She listened without interrupting, which was the thing I needed most. When I finished, she said, "So let me understand. A man your husband saved with his last conscious decision has been supporting you and Emma for 7 years out of a private sense of honor. And now his greedy brother-in-law is trying to argue the money belongs to him." "That's about it," I said. "And what does Gerald say your position is?" "Legally airtight." "Then you're fine," she said. "The only thing Marcus can do is make noise, and you've dealt with his noise before." She paused. "Sarah, you survived Daniel dying. You survived one income and a mortgage and grief and raising that brilliant daughter alone. Marcus Mitchell is background noise." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in 2 weeks. "Come for dinner Saturday," she said. "Kwame is making jollof rice. Bring Emma. We'll sit around the table and talk about something that has nothing to do with any of this." I went. Renata's house was warm and loud and smelled of peppers and palm oil, and Kwame, who was large and generous and had no patience for pretension, made us eat too much and told stories about his family in a crate until Emma was laughing so hard she had to put down her fork. I sat at that table in the lamplight and felt for the first time in months like a person rather than a position in someone else's legal strategy. It mattered. More than I can explain. It simply mattered. They came on a Sunday. I had not invited them. I had not given them reason to believe they would be welcome. But at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, while Emma was upstairs doing homework and I was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a stack of documents Gerald had sent over, a car pulled up in front of the house and Marcus and Diana Mitchell walked up my porch steps, carrying what appeared to be a bottle of wine. I watched them through the window for a moment before I went to the door. Diana was wearing a cream-colored sweater and carrying the wine like a prop. Marcus had his hands in his coat pockets and was looking at the house. My house. The house I had fought to keep. With an expression I recognized. Assessment. Ownership that hadn't happened yet. I opened the door before they knocked. "Sarah." Diana moved first, her smile wide and practiced. "We should have called. Marcus and I talked and we felt terrible about how everything has gone. We brought wine. Can we just sit down and talk like adults? Like family?" I looked at them both. "Emma is home," I said. "That's lovely," Diana said. "We'd love to see her." I stepped back and let them in, not because I trusted them, because I wanted them where I could see them, and because whatever they were about to try, I intended to witness it fully and consciously. I did not go to get Emma. I put the wine on the counter and sat across from them at the kitchen table. No glasses, no pleasantries beyond the minimum. I folded my hands on the surface and waited. Marcus started slowly. "We've done a lot of thinking," he said, "about Daniel, about family, about how we let things get fractured. We don't want to be adversaries, Sarah. That's not who we are." "You retained Morrison, Hale, and Webb," I said. He waved a hand. "A reaction. We've dropped that. The point is, we think there's a way forward that works for everyone." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. He set it on the table between us. I did not touch it. "It's a family agreement," he said. "Nothing formal, just an acknowledgement that Daniel's estate, his legacy, should benefit everyone who loved him. A shared arrangement. You'd retain the majority, of course. We're not asking for anything unreasonable." Diana leaned forward. "It's about Emma having her family intact, Sarah. Her uncle, her cousins. Children need that. They need roots. They need people." Her voice went soft. "Daniel would have wanted that." Daniel would have wanted that. The words landed like a stone in still water. I looked at Diana for a long moment. I thought about who Daniel actually was. I thought about the man who had grabbed his friend's shoulder in the dark in the fraction of a second before a truck hit them, without calculation, without hesitation, because it was simply the right thing to do. I thought about whether that man would want his wife strong-armed at her kitchen table by his brother and sister-in-law, using his name as a crowbar. "May I look at the document?" I said. Marcus's shoulders relaxed slightly. He thought this was a concession. I unfolded it. I read it carefully. It was not a family agreement. It was a settlement framework, drafted based on the language by a real estate attorney that would require me to acknowledge the $25 million transfer as potentially related to Daniel's employment and death, and to agree to divide the funds in proportions that would leave me with 60% and Marcus's family with 40%. 40% of $25 million was $10 million. It also included a clause, buried in paragraph 7, that would void Gerald's declaratory judgment filing. I refolded the document and set it back on the table. "No," I said. The temperature in the room dropped. "Sarah," Marcus began, "this document asks me to mischaracterize the nature of Robert Carver's gift in order to manufacture a legal basis for your claim. It would also require me to withdraw a court filing that protects my legal position. I will not sign it." I kept my voice entirely level. "I'd like you both to leave." Diana's composure cracked first. "You are being incredibly selfish," she said, her voice rising. "You're sitting on $25 million and you can't extend a hand to your husband's family." "Daniel's family," I said, "is Emma. And me. That's who Robert Carver addressed. That's who is on every transfer for 7 years. Not you. You will regret this." Marcus stood. The warmth was gone completely. What was underneath it had the quality of something that had been waiting a long time. "You think that legal filing protects you? We can challenge the competency of the trust. We can argue undue influence. We have resources, Sarah, and we have time." "So does my attorney," I said. I stood as well. "Show yourselves out." Diana grabbed the wine off the counter on her way through the door, as if that mattered, as if the wine had ever been real. I listened to the car leave. Then I stood in my kitchen and breathed. Was I afraid? Yes. Marcus's threat about the trust challenge was not empty. It was the kind of legal nuisance that could drag on for years, cost hundreds of thousands in fees, expose Robert's private affairs to scrutiny he didn't deserve in the final weeks of his life. It was the kind of campaign that was designed not to win, but to exhaust. But something happened in that fear. It clarified. It burned off everything soft and uncertain and left behind something precise. I thought about Robert Carver in a ranch house in Bend, dying with the knowledge that he had done what he could. I thought about Daniel's hands on his friend's shoulder in the dark. I thought about Emma at Renata's table, laughing over jollof rice. No, I thought, not $1. I called Gerald. I told him what had happened, described the document, and told him to expect an escalation. "Good," he said. "Now we have documented evidence of harassment and an attempted coercive settlement. Every move they make strengthens your position. Can they really challenge the trust?" I asked. "They can try," he said. "They will lose. But Sarah, We need Robert Carver's own statement, a notarized declaration of intent. Is he well enough? I thought of the letter I had written, the one Paul had delivered. I don't know, I said, but I'm going to find out. Robert Carver lived in a ranch house on the eastern edge of Bend, where the high desert opened up beyond the last row of juniper trees, and the sky went on longer than made sense. Paul Drennan had confirmed, through a cautious intermediary, that Robert had received my letter, that he had read it more than once, that he had asked if I would be willing to come to Bend in person. I drove. 7 hours from Portland through the Cascades, through the Ponderosa Pines and the Pass, down into the high desert. Emma was at school. Renata knew where I was going. Gerald was prepared. Robert met me at his door. He was smaller than I had imagined, or perhaps illness had made him smaller than he had been. 70 pounds lighter than his driver's license photo, I guessed. His hands shook slightly, but his eyes were clear and brown and direct, and when he looked at me, I understood immediately that this was a man who had been carrying something enormous for a very long time, and had finally found someone he could set it down in front of. "You look like someone who loved him," he said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He made tea. We sat in a living room with wide windows facing the desert, and he talked for 2 hours. He told me about Daniel, the Daniel I had known, but also the Daniel I hadn't, the one at work, the engineer who checked his calculations 3 times and brought coffee for the entire office on Fridays and argued for better site safety standards in meetings where everyone else stayed quiet. He told me about the morning of the accident. He told me haltingly about the years afterward, the guilt that had made him unable to face me, the decision to find a way to help without asking for forgiveness he felt he hadn't earned, the monthly transfers that were the only form of reparation he had understood how to make. "I should have contacted you," he said. "I know that. I was a coward about it." "You weren't a coward," I said. "You were a person trying to find a way through something impossible." He looked at me for a long time. "Your letter said Daniel would not have wanted me to carry this alone." "He wouldn't have." Robert nodded slowly. "I have a notary coming at 3 o'clock, he said. "Gerald Oakes was very thorough in his communication. I understand what's needed." "You don't have to do this if it's—" "I want to," he said, firmly, for all his frailty. "I want there to be a record that says exactly what I intended, that no one can misconstrue." The notary arrived at 3. She was a woman in her 50s, professional and efficient. Robert signed a 5-page notarized declaration of gift, a legal document establishing in precise language that the $25 million transfer Worsen, along with every prior monthly transfer of $5,555 sourced from the same personal trust, constituted a voluntary, unconditional, private charitable gift from Robert Allen Carver to Sarah Ann Mitchell, made in honor of Daniel James Mitchell, with no conditions, no obligations, and no claim on the part of any third party. He signed every page. I witnessed. The notary sealed and certified. I drove back to Portland with the original documents in a locked box on the passenger seat, and I cried for about 40 minutes somewhere in the Cascades, and then I stopped and drove the rest of the way in silence. Gerald filed Robert's declaration with the court on Monday morning. By Wednesday, Morrison, Hale, and Webb had filed a formal challenge to the trust, a motion arguing that Robert Carver had been subject to undue influence at the time of the $25 million transfer, citing his terminal illness as grounds for questioning his competency. The hearing was set for the following Thursday. Gerald prepared me in his office the night before. "They will try to make Robert seem confused," he said. "They have nothing, but they will try." "He's dying," I said. "He doesn't need to be subjected to—" "He won't be in the room," Gerald said. "His declaration will speak for him. You will speak for yourself, and I will take care of the rest." The courtroom was a standard civil chamber. Wood paneling, fluorescent light, the smell of old paper and carpet cleaner. Marcus and Diana sat with their attorneys at the respondents' table. Marcus had chosen a gray suit, which I noted with a detached part of my mind was the same shade as Daniel's eyes. Diana would not look at me. Gerald presented the case methodically. The 7 years of documented transfers, the bank records, Robert's medical certification of sound mind from his oncologist, dated 1 week before the $25 million transfer, the notarized declaration, signed, witnessed, certified, and then the accident report, which Gerald had included not because it was legally required, but because it told the only story that mattered. Daniel Mitchell had put himself between Robert Carver and a truck, and Robert Carver had spent 7 years trying to account for that. Morrison, Hale, and Webb's lead attorney attempted to argue undue influence. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had the expression of someone who had heard too many thin arguments to waste time being patient with them, asked the attorney twice to specify what evidence supported the claim that Ms. Mitchell had exerted influence over the decedent designate. The attorney cited the letter I had written to Robert. The judge read the letter, in full, in silence. Then she looked at the attorney over her glasses and said, "Counsel, this letter expresses gratitude and instructs the sender not to carry guilt alone. In what way does this constitute undue influence?" "Your Honor, the context." "The context," the judge said, "is a woman writing a kind letter to a dying man. Unless you have something substantive to add, I'm inclined to rule on the existing record." Marcus leaned over to his attorney and whispered something tightly. His attorney straightened. "Your Honor, we'd ask for an adjournment to—" "Denied." The judge looked at her papers for a long moment. Then she looked at me. I met her eyes. I had nothing to hide and 7 years of receipts to prove it. "This is not a close case," the judge said. "The declaratory judgment is affirmed. The gift is legal, voluntary, and uncontested by competent evidence. The challenge is dismissed." I heard Diana say Marcus's name, sharp, urgent, low. I heard his chair move. I looked straight ahead. It was over. Gerald put his hand briefly on my shoulder as we gathered our papers. I stood. I was steady. I walked out of the courtroom and down the corridor and through the heavy double doors into the gray Portland afternoon, and the air outside smelled like rain, and it was the best thing I had ever breathed. The judge's ruling was entered into the court record the same afternoon. Gerald had a certified copy in his hands by 5 o'clock. Morrison, Hale, and Webb withdrew from representation within 2 weeks. Gerald told me, with characteristic understatement, that they had likely concluded the case had nothing left to bill for. Marcus and Diana did not file an appeal. Perhaps they consulted a second attorney and received an honest opinion. Perhaps they simply ran out of theories. Whatever the reason, the legal challenge died without a sound. Gerald filed one final motion, a request for the court to award attorneys' fees against the respondents on grounds of frivolous litigation. The motion was granted. Marcus was ordered to pay a portion of Gerald's fees. The amount was not enormous in the context of $25 million. The principle was everything. Gerald called to tell me. I thanked him and hung up and sat on my back porch for a while, watching the garden. Daniel had planted those roses along the fence. I had kept them alive for 7 years without knowing what I was doing. They still came back every spring. Pacific First Bank, with Gerald's guidance, moved the funds into a structured private wealth management arrangement. Gerald referred me to a financial advisor he trusted, a woman named Claire Abbott, who specialized in sudden wealth transitions and was, refreshingly, the least flashy person I had ever met. Claire and I spent 3 sessions working through a plan, trusts for Emma's education and future, established and sealed. A separate endowment in Daniel's name contributed to the Oregon Engineering Foundation's Safety Initiative, the cause Daniel had argued for in those meetings where everyone else stayed quiet. The remainder invested conservatively. I continued teaching. I was not ready to stop, and more importantly, I didn't want to. The classroom was mine. It had kept me human. I wrote to Robert one more time. I told him what had happened in the courtroom. I told him the judge had read my letter aloud and found it kind. I told him Emma was applying to high school honors programs and had decided she wanted to study environmental science. I told him the roses in my backyard were coming in early that year. I did not hear back. Paul Drennan called me on a Tuesday morning in April. Robert Carver had died the previous Sunday, peacefully at home. He had apparently instructed his hospice nurse, in his final days, to place a framed photograph on his nightstand. Paul had heard this from Robert's attorney, who was handling the estate. The photograph was of the Cascade Bridge Partners' firm picnic, circa 11 years ago. Daniel was in it, laughing, holding a paper plate. I sat down when Paul told me this. "Did he have family?" I asked. "A sister in Sacramento," Paul said. "They were close. She was with him." "Good," I said. "That's good." I took Emma out to dinner that night. A real dinner, the kind we had been promising ourselves for years at a restaurant in the Pearl District that we'd driven past 100 times without going in. We sat by the window. Emma ordered the salmon. She was almost 15 now, impossibly composed, with a habit of asking questions that made adults feel like they hadn't thought carefully enough. She had known about Robert since Manzanita. She had known about the money since I made sure of it, because I had decided deliberately that my daughter would not grow up in proximity to a secret as significant as this one. She had handled it with characteristic Emma thoroughness, asked precise questions, gone quiet for an afternoon, and then come back with a list of causes she thought the Daniel Mitchell Foundation should support. "I've been thinking," she said over dinner, "about what he did. Robert, the transfers. What about them?" "He couldn't fix it," she said. "He couldn't bring Dad back. He couldn't even face you in person for 7 years. But he could do something every month that said, 'I remember. I'm still here.' And he did it for 7 years without asking for anything." She looked at the window, at the street outside. "I think that's one of the loneliest things I've ever heard." I looked at my daughter, this person Daniel and I had made, who had grown up in the particular soil of grief and steadiness, and I thought that she had understood something about Robert Carver that I hadn't found the words for myself. "Yes," I said. "I think so too." We split the dessert. On the way home, Emma took my hand, which she almost never did anymore at nearly 15. She held it for 2 blocks and then let go without comment, the way teenagers do, as if it had happened on its own, without intention. I counted it as a small and perfect thing. Marcus and Diana Mitchell did not contact me again. Not that month, not the month after. Gerald's fee award and the costs of their failed legal campaign had evidently been sobering. My declination of every prior olive branch had been noted. There was nothing left for them here, and they were pragmatic enough, if not decent enough, to recognize it. The chapter with them was closed, cleanly, without a scar that needed to be picked at. Gerald retired that summer. We had lunch on his last day, a long lunch, good wine, and he told me, not for the first time, that in 38 years of civil practice, I was in the top 3 cases he was glad he'd taken. I told him he had saved me from something that would have consumed years of my life. He said I had saved myself. He had just written the letters. He was right and wrong. The way good people usually are about the help they give. 2 years passed, then 3. Portland in those years felt like a city I was learning to see, without the scrim of constant low-grade anxiety I had mistaken for personality. The fog burned off each morning, and what was underneath was just my life, my actual life, no longer performed for survival. I kept teaching. Why? People would ask, with the expression of someone who cannot imagine choosing labor when it isn't required. The answer was simple. 22 fourth graders every September needed someone who had learned, through specific and unglamorous experience, that people can withstand more than they believe they can. I was not willing to stop teaching that. I renovated the house on Siskiyou Street, kept its bones, added a study, replanted Daniel's roses with a woman named Luz, who actually knew what she was doing. Emma enrolled at University of Oregon, environmental science, partial merit scholarship she had earned herself and refused to give up. I want it on my record, she said. Daniel's stubbornness. My stubbornness. The Daniel Mitchell Foundation became real, a board, a mission, grants to Oregon engineering programs focused on worker safety. Renata and I still had lunch every other Wednesday. Emma called Kwame Uncle K as if she always had. Was I happy? Yes. The quiet, durable kind that comes from surviving something and finding out what remains. Marcus and Diana. The failed legal challenge cost Marcus roughly $140,000. His real estate partnership, already struggling, didn't survive the drain. He took a salaried management position, a significant step down. Diana left her law office after a conflict with the partners. The Lake Oswego house was sold. They moved to Beaverton. I did not feel triumph. What I felt was simpler. The recognition that choices have consequences, and these had arrived without my help. I wished them nothing specific, just the life their choices had built. There is a version of this story where I spend years angry. That version would have been the real defeat. Robert's photograph. Daniel laughing at a firm picnic, paper plate in hand, sits on the windowsill in my study. His attorney sent it with a note saying Robert had kept it and wanted me to have one. Some mornings I look at it before I leave for school. Some mornings I don't. Both are fine.